Motion number 2 on business of the House today. Minister to move. The question is as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the motion on the draft guaranteed minimum pensions increase order, which will be debated together with the motion on the draft social security benefits uprating order. I call the Minister to move the first motion. Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do beg to move that the draft social security benefits uprating order 2026 be approved. And if I may, Madam Deputy Speaker, I will move both of these instruments at the same time and move that the draft guaranteed minimum pensions increase order 2026 also be approved, both of them having been laid before this House on the 12th of January. And Madam Deputy Speaker, in my view, the provisions in the instruments are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. So, firstly, the draft social security benefits uprating order. This will increase relevant state pension rates by 4.8%, in line with the growth in average earnings in the year to May to July 2025. It will increase most other benefit rates by 3.8%, in line with the rise in the Consumer Prices Index in the year to September 2025. And so the regular formula has been used. The order commits the government to increased expenditure of £9 billion in 2026-27, of which £6 billion will be from state pensions and pensioner benefits, £2 billion from disability and carers benefits, and £1 billion from other working age benefits. A further £2 billion of expenditure on working age benefits will be incurred in 2026 as a result of uprating decisions made under separate legal powers in the Universal Credit Act 2025, which will set new rates for universal credit and income-related employment and support allowance. Let me say a little more about each of the benefits being uprated in turn. So first of all, on pensions. The government's commitment to the triple lock means that the basic and full rate of the new state pension will be uprated by the highest of the growth in earnings or prices, or 2.5%. And that means the uprating will be by 4.8% for 2026-27. So as a result, from April, the basic state pension will increase from £176.45 per week to £184.90, and the full rate of the new state pension will increase from £230.25 at the moment to £241.30 per week. I'll gladly give way to Devon.
I suppose I ought to declare an interest. The Right Honourable Gentleman will understand that we welcome, of course, the adherence to the triple lock that my party introduced. He will also know that there are tens of thousands of expatriate United Kingdom citizens whose pensions have been and remain frozen at the point at which they left the United Kingdom, in spite of the fact that they have paid throughout their working lives in the UK their full taxes and national insurance contributions. The last government, to our shame, failed to address this issue. Does this government have any plans to do so?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising this point. It may be some comfort to him to know that it wasn't only the last government that failed to do anything about this, but previous governments also failed, and indeed in my previous tenures of the Office of Pensions Minister, this issue was raised with me. But of course it was the case that when those people left the UK, the rules were then as they are today. It was quite clear when people left, and of course it does depend which country they went to, but in the countries where uprating hasn't been applied, it's always been the case that uprating hasn't been applied there, and so it shouldn't have come as a surprise to those who left when their pensions weren't uprated. So there are not proposals at the moment that we're looking at to change that situation, but I know it's a matter that he's campaigned on consistently over a long period, and I pay tribute to him for that. Yes, I will.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Minister, one of the things that's come to my attention is while we very much welcome the triple lock, we welcome the extra monies coming to our pensioners. I had an 84-year-old pensioner in my office just last week. She says, Jim, I've got a demand from the HMRC for hundreds of pounds. I've never been in debt in all my life. Can I ask the Secretary of State, please, would he please do this for me if he could, please? When it comes to those pensioners who find themselves now being taxed when they were never taxed before, is it not possible to have a different system where the money could be taxed at source at the very beginning, rather than asking pensioners who are financially under pressure, who are mentally under pressure, emotionally under pressure, to fill in an online form that they just can't do? There must be a simpler way of doing it.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I mean, this is, of course, is a matter for Her Majesty's Treasury rather than me, the question of how the tax system operates. It may be some comfort to him to, he may already have heard, the reassurance provided by the Chancellor that those whose only income is the basic or new state pension without any increments will not have to pay any income tax in the course of this Parliament. But of course those who have additional income beyond the state pension very often do have a tax liability, but the mechanism for how that is applied is a matter for my honourable friends in Her Majesty's Treasury rather than me, but I can certainly make sure that his point is passed on to them. But Madam Deputy Speaker, other components of state pension awards, such as those previously built up under earnings-related state pension schemes, including the additional state pension, will increase by 3.8% in line with prices. The Government is committed to supporting pensioners on the lowest incomes, and so the safety net provided by the Pension Credit Standard Minimum Guarantee will increase by 4.8%. That means for single pensioners it will increase from £227.10 to £238 per week. For couples from £346.60 to £363.25 per week. The pension credit savings credit maximum amount will increase by 3.8% in line with prices. Yes, sir, gladly.
I thank the Minister for giving way. One of the first acts of this government was to remove the winter fuel payment, which they've subsequently partially U-turned on. And the Prime Minister himself promised assistance for WASPI women, something that is manifestly not happening. These both impact pensioners in a significant way. When it comes to the uprating of new and old pensions, pensioners on the old pension are seeing that gap widening all the time, because although they're going up by the same percentage, they're starting from different baselines. What is the government doing to try and equalise those pension levels to try and prevent that from that situation from becoming worse?
Well, we're not proposing any change in those arrangements at the moment. As he'll know, these arrangements were introduced by the previous government, in fact I think by the coalition government that put in place the current arrangements for the new state pension, and they were introduced with commitments about future uprating, and we are committed to delivering the triple lock for those, but we're not planning to sort of change the relativities between those two arrangements. But if I can now, Madam Deputy Speaker, move on to working age benefits. Most working age benefits and other benefits for people below state pension age will also increase by 3.8%. That includes statutory payments such as statutory sick pay, statutory maternity pay, the personal allowances of income support, housing benefit, job seekers allowance and contributory employment and support allowance. The order will also increase the child amounts, the carer amounts, transitional severe disability premiums in universal credit, and pensioner and carer premiums in income-related employment and support allowance, all by 3.8%. The Universal Credit Act 2025, as I mentioned earlier, included very important changes to rebalance universal credit. For 2026 to 7, the standard allowance in universal credit will be uprated by September CPI plus an additional 2.3%. Now, this represents the first permanent above-inflation rise to the universal credit standard allowance that there has ever been, and I believe it's the first permanent real terms increase in the headline benefit rate since the 1970s. However, it isn't in the order we are debating today. But all these increases will apply across Great Britain. Yes, I will.
Minister, giving way. And I very much appreciate the action the government has taken on uprating UC for the first time, as he says, in its history. However, would he accept that that it still doesn't cover the cost of the basic essentials like food, heating and rent for many of our most put upon constituents?
Well, I think perhaps the point he's making that it doesn't fulfil the aspirations of the Essentials Guarantee campaign, which he and I are familiar with, and that is true. But this uprating above inflation in April will be the first of 4 such upratings. So there will be a similar over-inflation uprating in each of this coming April and each of the following 3 Aprils. It will not end up at the level that there's been a campaign for the Essentials Guarantee around. But let's see what happens beyond the period that we have made these announcements for. And as he said, it is a historic change of direction for public policy. Benefits for people in England and Wales who have additional costs as a result of disability or ill health will also increase by 3.8%. These include disability living allowance, attendance allowance and personal independence payment. The increase will also apply to carers allowance. And let me turn also, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order 2026, or the GMP Increase Order. This sets out the yearly amount by which the guaranteed minimum pension part of an individual's contracted out occupational pension earned between 1988 and April 1997 must be increased when it is being paid. The increase is paid by occupational pension schemes and helps to provide a measure of inflation protection to people in receipt of contracted out occupational pensions which were earned between those 2 years, 1988 and 1997. The law requires that GMPs earned between those 2 dates must be increased by the percentage increase in the general level of prices as measured the previous September, capped at 3%. So the September 2025 inflation figure, or CPI figure, was 3.8%. The increase for the financial year 2026-27 will be 3%. Having that 3% cap does provide pension schemes with more certainty, allowing them to forecast their future liabilities more reliably, and that is important when they're considering their funding commitments. And this does strike a balance, I think, between protecting members against the effects of inflation on the one hand, but not increasing scheme costs beyond what schemes and sponsoring employers can reasonably afford on the other. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order, if Parliament approves it, commits the government to increase expenditure of £9 billion in the next financial year. Changes will mainly come into effect from the 6th of April this year and apply for the tax year 2026-27. The order maintains the triple lock, which benefits pensioners in receipt of both the basic and new state pensions, raises the level of the safety net in pension credit beyond the increase in prices, and increases the rates of benefit for those in the labour market and increases the rates of carers' benefits and benefits to help with additional costs arising from disability or health impairment. The draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order requires formally contracted out occupational pension schemes to pay an increase of 3% on GMPs in payment earned between April 1988 and April 1997, giving a measure of protection against inflation paid for by their scheme. I commend the draft Social Security Benefits Uprating Order 2026 and the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order 2026 to the House.
The question is the motion on the draft Guaranteed Minimum Pensions Increase Order as on the order paper. Shadow Minister Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to just start by reassuring the Right Honourable Member for East Ham about something that I said last week in the two-child benefit cap debate. I shared something of my story and said that we had lost child benefit as a result of the new Labour government coming in 1997. I was convinced I had said family credit, which was what I was supposed to say. And when I saw it back and it was read back over Hansard, we realised in my haste to get my point across, I had in fact said the wrong thing, which makes sense of his perplexed face, which I caught across the front benches. So I just wanted to put that on record, although I have also done that in Hansard. So firstly, this afternoon, I can of course affirm that the opposition supports the increase of the guaranteed minimum pension and the uprating of social security benefits as is usual. However, given that this debate is largely a formality and there will be no vote on these motions, it is a good opportunity to take a step back and reflect on the pensions and benefits system more broadly, albeit of course within the frame of these motions before us this afternoon. Now, first off, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to highlight what I call the benefits barbell. At one end, the working age welfare bill keeps getting heavier. On the other, the cost of public sector defined benefits pensions is eye-watering. Yet in the middle of these two heavy weights is the hard-working taxpayer straining under the load. Welfare and pensions both matters. They are pillars of a decent society, but it is Britain's taxpayers who do the heavy lifting. They are the ones who get up before dawn, commute in all weathers and keep the economy moving. Without their effort or even more government borrowing, there would be no welfare state at all. And we cannot pile more weight onto their shoulders indefinitely. The Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions has already admitted that the long-awaited Timms review will not involve making welfare savings and is now not likely to be published before 2027. It seems that this government is shunning any attempts at reform over the coming year. And yet again, it is the taxpayers who bear the cost of this delay. Right now, the UK is on the verge of becoming a welfare state with an economy attached. Over 40,000 people were signed off work every day by GPs over the last year, according to the Centre for Social Justice. Over 5 million people are claiming benefits with no work requirements, and that is equivalent to a population over half the size of London. Now, concerningly, Madam Deputy Speaker, this number includes more than 300,000 people aged 16 to 24, young people with promising lives ahead of them whose ambitions are being stifled by a benefit system which would rather write them off. Labour is presiding over a youth unemployment crisis and seems unable to offer long-term solutions. There are already nearly 1 million young people in the UK who are not in education, employment or training. Over 700,000 university graduates are out of work and on benefits. 1.5 years after taking office, this government is still failing to tame the runaway benefits bill and rising unemployment rates. By contrast, the Conservative plan is to get Britain working again, which will tackle youth unemployment by offering young people a first jobs bonus, which they can use to save for their first home. Now, living within our means is one of those sensible, mundane things which gives the Conservative Party its reputation as a safe pair of hands for the economy. Of course, making welfare savings is far less likely to grab headlines. Scrapping the two-child benefits cap or rolling out more free school meals is a far easier win. But getting the deficit under control is absolutely crucial to a healthy economy. When Conservatives took office in 2010, the government were running a deficit of 9%. By the time COVID struck, we had brought it down to under 1%. This, in turn, enabled us to provide generous support to individuals and businesses during lockdowns. Now, as I said in the debate on the two-child benefit cap last week, keeping the limit would have saved the taxpayer £2.4 billion in 2026-27, rising to £3.2 billion in 2030-31. Yet our current Prime Minister would rather throw some red meat to his backbenchers than exercise fiscal discipline. He has caved into their demands, even though scrapping the two-child benefit limit was previously ruled out by the Chancellor and was conspicuously absent from Labour's manifesto. Conservatives believe in fairness for the working parents who make difficult choices about whether they can afford another child. Many working families do not have incomes much higher than the threshold for universal credit, but are paying for others through their taxes. Why should we make these parents bear a double burden of supporting their own children as well as subsidising other people's? A fair system should not simply exempt families on benefits from making tough choices. Now, speaking of fairness, the issue of passported benefits desperately needs investigating. Last week, I highlighted the shocking statistic that 1 in 4 full-time UK workers would be better off on benefits than in work. But something that often gets overlooked is that people on universal credit also gain access to a raft of discounts and additional benefits, such as free prescriptions, discounted broadband, healthy food cards, and special savings accounts. There are over 20 of these schemes sprinkled across multiple government departments. Now, together, taken together, passported benefits give some families who are already on universal credit over £10,000 a year in extra support, costing the taxpayer over £10 billion, according to a new report from the think tank Onward. These benefits need rationalising and streamlining within universal credit, otherwise we will continue to face 3 serious problems. Firstly, these passported benefits disincentivise people from entering employment. Any sensible person would think twice about starting a job if they faced a cliff-edge denial of additional benefits worth thousands of pounds once their universal credit tapers away. Secondly, we have a 2-tier system. As a result of these linked benefits, individuals just outside the universal threshold often face greater financial hardship than benefit claimants. And thirdly, for those who really do need these extra schemes, there is a labyrinth of bureaucracy which slows down the process of getting help. These piecemeal entitlements distort the system. From a quantitative perspective, it's hard to see which poverty interventions are actually having a positive effect. It is also incredibly difficult for everyone to see if this government is succeeding at reducing poverty. Now, I welcome the government's new emphasis on deep material poverty as a headline poverty metric. This is a far more holistic measure which captures how poverty impacts people's daily lives and whether they can afford necessities. Last week, we heard endlessly that the government's child poverty strategy and the scrapping of the two-child benefit cap will bring 500,000 children out of poverty. But it is worth noting that we are talking about relative poverty. This can never be eradicated because it refers to a household income below 60% of the median household income. The only way to reduce relative poverty is to raise the incomes of the poorest faster than the middle or compress the income distribution. An overemphasis on relative poverty has underpinned a misleading left-wing argument that exaggerates the need for income redistribution. I worry that we will end up paying people to be so-called middle class if we continue as we are. Now, at the heart of Conservative philosophy is a belief in personal responsibility, taking control of your future through hard work and aspiration. If we're serious about tackling child poverty long-term, it is vital to deal with the effects of intergenerational worklessness and not to just rely on social security. Children in long-term workless households are 4 times more likely to be materially deprived. They are 10% more likely to end up workless themselves. For every parent who does not go out to work, there is a child who misses seeing a positive example of work modelled to them. The early alarm clock, the daily routine, the reward for an honest day work, and the ability to save up to buy important things. Now, that's not to say that there aren't those in dire circumstances for a vast number of reasons, but ultimately, when we're looking at people in general, that is the reality we need to deal with. Under our watch, the number of children in workless households fell consistently. Under Labour, this number has reached a 9-year high, with 1.2 million children now living in homes where no parent has worked for over a year. Now, turning, Madam Deputy Speaker, to the topic of personal independent payments, I would like to ask the Minister about a disabled constituent I caught up with at the weekend. a veteran who served in the Royal Navy for 19 years and is now an unpaid carer for her elderly father. She works full-time, mainly from home, and commutes to London a few times a month. She had a Motability scooter, which enabled her to get to the office and around London when required. But after her last PIP review, which took place over the phone, she lost her higher rate of PIP and thus her scooter. She then received a puzzling letter from the Department for Work and Pensions, which wrongly claimed that full-time work indicated she had reasonable mobility, despite the fact that her entire home is adapted for her accessibility requirements. Now, my constituent is a highly capable woman who is skilled at advocating for herself as well as her father, and indeed for her fellow veterans. But she admitted that she felt too stressed to open the letter for a few weeks, meaning that the reconsideration window had timed out by the time she fully processed the DWP's decision. For context, she has also been diagnosed with complex PTSD following a traumatic experience in the military and is currently on a long waiting list for treatment. Statistically, she is unusual. Fewer than 1 in 6 PIP claimants are in employment. So it seems bizarre that the DWP assessors are happy to downgrade someone in this situation who is in work and genuinely needs the higher rate of PIP to help her carry out that work, yet the department seems reluctant to stem the tide of benefits claims from people with less severe mental health issues. That is why a Conservative government will end sickness benefits for low-level mental health problems to ensure support is targeted to people who need it most. I welcome the government's commitment to increase the number of face-to-face PIP assessments to 30%, up from the very low rate of 5% in 2024, but I would urge them to be even more ambitious with their target to ensure that constituents like mine are accurately assessed and receive the help that they need. So in conclusion, as I return to the image I began with, the barbell is getting heavier by the year, with welfare on one side and pensions on the other. And still, the hard-working taxpayer stands in the middle, doing all the heavy lifting. And it's my belief that government is doing far too little to ease that pressure. Working families are paying the price for a system that grows ever more expensive, while true reform moves at a crawl. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's time for a welfare system that is fair to those who need to support and fair to those who pay for it.
Chair of the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to follow the Opposition Minister. If I could just pick up on a couple, there were several things really I would like to challenge, but I'm just going to pick up on a couple, if I may, at this moment. First of all, I think one of her opening statements was that hard-working people who get up at dawn and who go out to work basically don't approve of this increase in support. I would like to gently point out to her that most of the people who are on receipt of social security support are actually working, but they're in low-paid jobs presided over by previous Conservative administration. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think she was talking about the concerns about young people. Yes, absolutely. Nearly a million young people who are not in education, employment or training, and that concerns us all. But looking at the evidence, and we must all do this, looking at the evidence that the causes that underlie this, she may have not heard me say last week, and I've said it a few times, but the evidence from the UK Millennium Cohort Study is that half of that population have experienced childhood poverty and adversity in their young years under the former Conservative government. And that is the driver. You're five times more likely to be not in education, employment or training if you have experienced this long childhood poverty and adversity, which again I don't think the Minister would claim that hasn't happened. But it is a pleasure to also to follow on from my right honourable friend, and I also give the uprating order for pensions and social security my wholehearted support. It is absolutely the right thing to do, and I'm going to expand on exactly why. So this year's uprating, confirmed last November by the Secretary of State, will see inflation-linked benefits and tax credits rise by 3.8% this April. the level of inflation as measured by the Consumer Price Index in September 2025. As a result of the Universal Credit Act 2025, some people didn't support that, but I did. Once we got rid of the bits that I had concerns about, the fact that we increase the standard allowance in universal credit is really important. This will mean an additional 2.3% in the standard allowance. And that will equate to a single claimant over 25 having seen their standard allowance increase from £400.14p to £424.90p per calendar month. I will.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. I'm sure she may be aware of the Resolution Foundation report today that shows how an increase in incomes has significantly slowed over the past 20 years, particularly for those on low incomes, as shown by the basic rate of UC falling by 9% in real terms since 2010. So I wonder, would she think there is merit in the proposals from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation for an independent advisory process to inform universal credit rates, ensuring that the standard allowance reflects the real cost of essentials and the inflation experienced by those living on lower incomes?
My honourable friend may not know, but the Minister and I were on the Select Committee at the time that Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Russell Trust were presenting the case for the essentials. And there's overwhelming support, I think, for this, but it's a question of how we do it in a sustainable way. And if I could go on and develop my argument a little bit, but I think he will see that I'm moving in his direction. The state pension will also increase, as we've heard. In this particular case, it will be increased by 4.8% in April. So to £241.30 per week for the new state pension, in line with the annual increase in the average wage earnings index from last May to September. But I'm going to mention just very, very quickly why it's important that we do see the increase in UC above CPI inflation. Although state support for working age people and pensioners has been fairly similar when annual uprating was first introduced in 1972, the uprating or increase in working age social security support in line with inflation, such as UC, has not always happened. So in the last 15 years, social security support for working age people was only increased by 1% between 2013 and 16, and then frozen between 2016 and 2020. Now, if anyone who wants to go and have a look at the changes in inflation over the last 15 years, it makes interesting reading, particularly in 2022, 3 and 3-4. This is much below inflation. And as a result of this, since 2012, you've seen benefit levels for working age people and their families have lost 8.8% of their value. The UK's social protections levels are amongst the least generous in the OECD. In 2021, the New Economics Foundation estimated that the actual loss in cash terms was equivalent to £14 billion. They also estimated that if spending had been maintained, there would have been 1.5 million fewer people living in poverty. People are often surprised to hear that over the last 20 years or so, the amount of DWP spending as a percentage of GDP, which is acknowledged as the only way you can fairly compare spending, has changed very little. It was 10% in 2025 and in 2005, and in 2025 was 11%. The slight increase being accounted for an increase in spending on pensioners, which I think we would all agree is the right thing to do and we would support. What is alarming is that although poverty levels have been stabilised and will start coming down this year as a result, for example, of the removal of the 2-child limit to social security support and the increase in the living wage, The depth of poverty is increasing. The Joseph, very briefly.
Thank you. I thank the Honourable Member for giving way. When it comes to tackling child poverty, there are many things that can be done, but one of the things that the Scottish Government has done, and which has massive backing from the third sector, is introducing a universal child payment. Would the Honourable Member agree that that's potentially a way forward?
I'm familiar with the child payment. I need to understand it in the context of what else is happening in Scotland as well. So I'm aware of it, and I think it's an interesting way that Scotland have tried to address that. We also had a meeting with the Scottish Child Commissioner, and were impressed with what she was doing as well. But I'll reserve judgment till I understand it a little bit more in the round, as they say. So the Joseph Rowntree Foundation only last week published new analysis showing that in 2021-24, the average person in poverty had an income of 29% below the poverty line. And that is up from the gap of 23% in 1994-97. If we use equivalised figures, this means that for couples without children, they are living on less than £12,500 a year. For children, for couples with two children under 14, this is about £17,500 a year. So social security is complex, but the importance of looking at deep poverty, which my honourable friend is doing, is really, really important. And if we avoid the appalling situation with the needs that we have inherited, then this is what we need to do. Of the 14.2 million people living in poverty identified in JRF's most recent poverty analysis, 6 million are in severe and persistent poverty, and more than half are disabled or live in a disabled household. Whilst I recognise the significant moves this government has made to address the inadequacy of working age social security support to tackle the poverty and cost of living crisis that people are experiencing, I think personally we need to be a bit bolder. As I said last week, I would like to see us be clear about our vision and values which define what our social security system is for. It's 80 years since the 1946 National Insurance Act, which was introduced in response to the Beveridge report and to the outcomes, the appalling circumstances after the Second World War. I believe we need a new social contract which the British people can buy into, which spells out how all the elements of a comprehensive 21st century welfare state work together to deliver for them. For me, our social security system, like our NHS, should be there for all of us in our time of need. It should protect us from poverty if we lose our jobs, are born with or acquire health conditions or disabilities, and when we grow old. It should also be there for us if and when we need extra support, when we become carers, or sadly when we lose a loved one. But it can't work in isolation. It needs to be considered in conjunction with our health and social care, education and skills, and business and employment systems in particular, but there's more as well. Without a fit, healthy, working age population, a skilled workforce and a fair employment system providing quality, well-remunerated jobs, our economic productivity is known to fall. And our welfare system as a whole then becomes under threat. As an example, Health Equity North's Health is Wealth report shows that improving the health of the North to the same level as the rest of the country would add an extra £18.4 billion a year to the economy through enhanced productivity while reducing demand on the NHS. Last year, the Work and Pensions Select Committee commissioned Health Equity North to report on what the income could be generated through increasing return to work for people in receipt of universal credit by just 5%. Their estimates show that it would yield an extra £20 billion over the life of the Parliament, with a return on investment of between £5.21 and £6.63 for every £1 of employment support invested. This is the way we're going to reduce DWP spending. This is the way we're going to increase growth. So I look forward to how Get Britain Working and Keep Britain Working programmes such as Connect to Work and the Vanguards are expanded. They're a fantastic example of how we can proceed. I was so impressed when I met organisations that are delivering Connect to Work, and the Select Committee had a session last week with Sir Charlie Mayfield and also small businesses to see how they could be involved in that. But I do hope that we can expand this and build on it. Thank you so much, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's always a pleasure to follow the member for Saddleworth and East Oldham. It's almost as if she'd been cribbing off my speech. Maybe it's because we are both on the DWP Select Committee. And the reality is that our welfare state is part of a society that should be at ease with itself. And I'd like to reflect that the old age pension was first introduced by Asquith in 1908 for 70-year-olds. That demonstrates that, the Liberals were there at the foundation of our welfare state. Fast forward a few decades and we found that Margaret Thatcher actually broke the link with earnings with pensions, and that had a devastating effect on pensioner poverty, increasing it significantly over many years. So it was really heartening that when back in government, the Liberal Democrats, as part of the coalition, was part of the government that introduced the triple lock, where we have seen pensioner poverty being driven down, but there's still too much of it. I'm also concerned that the current Conservative leader has mused about means testing the triple lock. And this is disturbing. Will she put it back to the 5 shillings a week that we had under Asquith, and being of good character, I wonder? But we will look for the white smoke to appear from the Conservative Party on that world. And reflecting on pensioner poverty, because as my colleague just before me was reflecting on, we've done a lot of work as part of the DWP Select Committee around this world, and it's interesting to hear from people, particularly people who we've heard evidence from in recent weeks, where as you get older, particularly manual workers find it harder to continue the jobs that they're in, and how we need to make sure that there's a whole systems approach, making sure that employers are more flexible, and the Mayfield report is important of that, how rather than just shuffling people off the books, we need to make sure that employers like our continental friends do see what reasonable adaptations they can do to keep them on the books. But also, pensioner poverty is something that we need to drive forward with. And I can only reflect in my own constituency of Torbay, where I've had people heading towards pension, wanting to still work, but not able to because they have had a dodgy hip and they're awaiting an operation. Sadly, the improvements at our hospital has been delayed by many, many years at Torbay Hospital. So again, it's as my previous colleague was alluding to, it is about making sure that we're sorting out our National Health Service across the country as a whole so that people are in a fit state to work, but also what causes Liberal Democrats concern is the way that social care has been kicked down the line and not being resolved sooner rather than later. I'd now like to move on to a key element of these proposals, where I'd like to welcome more generally the upgrading that we've seen from the Minister here today. But carers allowance and the fact that this is, carers, unpaid carers in the United Kingdom undertake the equivalent work to the value of the whole of our NHS, which is absolutely mind-blowing. But the SACE review investigated the overpayments to carers, and you only needed to earn £1 or so over a week for you to lose thousands of pounds for your carer's allowance and end up having a liability there. And last February, the SACE review found that there were 86,000 people who had that liability from overpayment of carer's allowance. The government have committed to clearing off, it was £87,000. The government have committed to clearing off, writing off £26,000. That means that £61,000 debts remain outstanding, and that causes grave concerns for lots of people who have that standing over them like a sword of Damocles. So I'd really be grateful if the Minister, in his windings up, is able to reflect on that area. Finally, the last benefit I'd like to reflect on is in respect of what was originally DLA, but now PIP. And that this benefit, unlike I know at the time of when this was a hot potato, some ministers described it as pocket money for people with disabilities. This is a benefit that is there to support people with basic living needs, whether it's being able to get out and about and live a normal life that many people would take for granted, or preparing food, or just the simple dignity of being clean and being able to wash and having help with that. This is a benefit that supports these people. So it's disturbing how last July, the Minister was there having to almost rip up the speech in front of him and going into bat with a rubber chicken effectively in his hand on this. But we welcome the upgrade of these benefits. But does it truly reflect the increase that we've seen in earnings and the ability for people who are on PIP to be able to take people on to support them? A colleague before me has already mentioned the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and the right to do so, because their report that was published last week shows that poverty has flatlined since 2005. And the really disturbing thing is, if you look at deprivation and deep poverty, the fact that I hear from church leaders in Torbay that they have seen destitution at much higher levels than what they've seen historically is absolutely shocking. So it's really disappointing that the government have not driven hard on trying to reform the welfare state in a positive way, making sure that we can tackle that deep poverty that many in our community suffer, making sure that we should be reforming the welfare state with those who use it so they can live their best lives. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Neil Duncan-Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our social security system acts as the bedrock of our welfare state. But for years, the safety net it was meant to provide has developed more and more holes, through which some of our most vulnerable citizens have fallen. Now, for our older generation, the state pension is absolutely the foundation on which a decent retirement can be built. The restoration of the triple lock has been key to raising the incomes of some of our poorest pensioners, which is why we need to see it continue, of course. But it would be wrong to say the job has been done when we still have 1.9 million older people living in poverty. And the weakness of our means-tested pension credit system is that around 750,000 older people are eligible to claim but have yet to do so. That is why we need to look again at the advantages of a universal system of income in retirement that reaches everyone. Even within the current uprating arrangements, there is an unfairness I want to bring out this afternoon. 8.3 million older people are in receipt of the old pre-2016 state pension, which is made up of the basic state pension and the second state pension, which for many would have been SERPS, the state earnings related pension scheme introduced by the late and great Barbara Castle. Whilst the triple lock applies to the basic state pension for these people, the lower consumer price index is used to uprate the second state pension. This year, that will give a difference of 1%, and over time, we have seen the gap between those on the old state pension and the new state pension widen. This is unfair, and we should consider uprating all pensions in the same way. Now, uprating, of course, is also a contentious issue that's already been mentioned in the Chamber this afternoon when it comes to overseas pensioners. Nearly 500,000 UK state pensioners do not receive the annual increase because they've moved to a country that does not have a reciprocal agreement with the UK. This means that their state pensions are frozen at the value they were when they left the UK. Now, for some, this will mean their pensions are now virtually worthless. So whilst today we can debate the annual uprating of the state pension, this process does not include the frozen pensions policy because that is dealt with through secondary legislation. Now, given the serious impact on many voters living overseas, this lack of scrutiny and the opportunity to vote means that this House is unable to hold the government to account on this issue, and I think that needs to change. Now, finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to address the issue of our social security system needing to provide for the essentials of living, which a number of members have already raised. This April, for the first time since universal credit, as the Minister said, the standard allowance will increase above inflation. This will certainly go some way to close the gap between the cost of essentials and is welcome, of course. But despite this boost, too many families will continue to face a significant shortfall between their income and the daily costs of living. Now, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation and Trussell estimate that a single adult needs at least £120 a week and a couple £205 a week to afford the essentials. Universal credit, sadly, falls short of this. We know that the vast majority of people referred to a food bank were in receipt of a means-tested social security payment, such as universal credit. And at the heart of the problem is the fact that there is no evidence-based foundation for setting benefit levels. As a result, updated rates don't properly reflect people's needs. That is why there is a call for an independent process that draws on research, including from those with lived experience, to advise ministers on how much universal credit needs to be to afford essentials like food, utilities and vital household items. The protection, Madam Deputy Speaker, offered by our social security system should be to ensure that no one in need falls through the gaps. This is a mark of a compassionate society and one we should be proud to advance.
With leave of the House, Minister to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With the leave of the House, I'm grateful to have that opportunity to do so, and I welcome the contributions that we've heard to the debate. There are a number of points I'd want to make in response to those that have been made. But let me start by just thanking everyone who's taken part. We've had some constructive and helpful contributions. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for South West Devon for clarifying her point about what happened in 1997. She read my facial expression correctly. I was perplexed when she told us that child benefit had been abolished. I think it was 1999. I've done a little bit of checking since she made that clarification. It was 1999 that family credit was replaced, but it was replaced, of course, by the much better tax credit system, a much stronger system. And I don't know whether the decision was made in her family not to apply for that, but there was big progress made, particularly in reducing child poverty across the country, thanks to the introduction of the working tax credits and then the wider tax credit system in 1999. She was absolutely right to draw attention to the scale of the challenge that the country faces with the number of young people not in education, employment or training. Nearly 1 million left behind by the previous government. And we are very energetically on the case now to address that problem. It should have been addressed long ago. It's encouraging that the proportion of young people out of education, employment or training has fallen over the last year, but we don't want anybody left behind. So we're investing £820 million into the Youth Guarantee over the next 3 years to make sure that every young person, every single young person, can access the support they need to earn or to learn. Nearly 900,000 young people will get intensive one-to-one support. We're expanding youth hubs to every area in the country, creating around 300,000 additional opportunities to gain valuable workplace experience and training, as well as under the Youth Guarantee, guaranteed jobs for some 55,000 young people aged 18 to 21. So she's absolutely right. There's a great deal to be done on this. We are finally doing it. And I'll be looking forward to reporting back to the House on progress as the progress develops. She referred to her party's reputation as having a safe pair of hands for managing the economy. Well, I think following the Liz Truss debacle, that reputation was sadly destroyed. And I think it's going to take the party opposite a long time to rebuild that reputation. The people have a long memory about the awful turbulence that the country was plunged into in that period, and that party reputation, her party's alleged reputation, is sadly long gone. She made the point about families having a choice about whether they can afford another child. Of course, one of the points that emerged in our debate about the two-child limit is that most families who are on universal credit, who've got more than 2 children, most of them were not on universal credit when they had their children. So actually that wasn't an issue in their minds when they made that choice. And I think the Conservative response in that debate doesn't reflect the realities of what families are facing. She made an interesting point about passported benefits, and I've seen the publicity around what the think tank Onward has said about this. I mean, it is understandable that service providers use an existing means test to target their provision. That's what the last government did on the cost of living payment, for example, during the pandemic. And indeed, I noticed that the head of Onward is a former Chief Secretary to the Treasury. So, you would have thought he would have perhaps have had a chance to do something about all this in those years when he was in office. But it is an interesting topic, and I think the arrangements that we've got for passported benefits make sense. But if there are proposals for alternative arrangements, we'll be interested to have a look at them. She was critical, as her honourable friend was last week, of the use of the relative poverty measure for assessing the number of children growing up in poverty. But the relative poverty measure is the standard measure. It's the international standard measure, widely respected, used for all international comparisons on this measure. The reason I think the Conservative Party has always been so reluctant to refer to relative poverty is because its performance in government on the relative poverty measure has always been so dreadful consistently in the government that left office in 2024 and before that as well. And so the point was made rightly in that debate on the two-child limit bill that it was quite an important part of David Cameron's work to bring the Conservative Party up to date, that he embraced relative poverty as a valuable measure that ought to be taken into account. We now seem to have moved back to the pre-Cameron era, in the Conservative Party, and I think it will take perhaps some time for the party to recognise the scale of the change that's needed in their thinking to reflect the country's current situation. I was interested to what she said about her constituent on PIP. I would very much like to see the letter that she referred to, because she's absolutely right. PIP is an in-work benefit as well as an out-of-work benefit, and I would be extremely concerned if people are being told, well, you're in work, you can't have PIP anymore. So I'd love to see that. And I think there are disincentives of that kind in the system that need to be addressed. I'd be grateful to have a look at that. As she knows, I'm co-chairing a review of PIP, which will conclude by the autumn of this year. She said she didn't think it would happen until 2027, but it will conclude by the autumn of this year. And she's right as well that we need to increase the proportion of face-to-face assessments for benefit. I'll just make this point and then I'll gladly give way. The reason that face-to-face assessments are such a small proportion of total assessments at the moment is because of the contracts which the Conservative government entered into towards the end of their term in office, which had no requirements for an adequate number of face-to-face assessments. And indeed, the Conservative government sold off most of the premises where many of these assessments took place, where they were undertaken. So, of course, it's taking some time to build up again the capacity to deliver those assessments. We are doing so. We are putting right the mistakes the previous government made, and we are seeing a steady increase in the proportion of both work capability assessments and PIP assessments that are undertaken on a face-to-face basis. I'll gladly give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way. And accuracy and fairness is really important, and I think the face-to-face assessments are vitally important. I suppose when one looks at the trajectory on the 30% increase, I think it is a little bit less than what I would like to see it at. I would like to see it at more. And can he give assurances to this House that it won't sit at 30%, that you will actually strive, that the government will actually strive for greater face-to-face assessments? Nothing beats the white of the eye.
We would certainly like to do so. I mean, let's get up to that level that we've set, which is a dramatic improvement on the situation that we inherited. And once we've done that, then we'll certainly learn the lessons and see what more we could do from there. I very much welcome the comments made by my honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, and commend her and her committee on its work. She referred to the research published, I think, towards the end of last year, showing that children who suffer poverty and adversity in childhood are, as she said, 5 times more likely to be neat as young adults. And I looked at that paper. It's a very interesting paper, and I think I'm right in saying that the paper did say if it was just below the poverty line, in other words, without the childhood adversity as well, the children who've grown up below the poverty line are 3 times more likely to be neat as young adults. So just looking at poverty on its own has a very big effect in increasing the likelihood of being neat. And so in order to tackle this big neat problem, and the opposition spokesperson was right to say that it does need tackling, then we do have to tackle child poverty, as we are doing with the scrapping of the 2-child limit in universal credit. I'll gladly give way to my honourable friend.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right about those 2 figures, but also the fact that it's over half of the current NEET cohort, 52.9%, who have experienced not just child poverty, but also family adversity. So, and that is the 5 times figure.
I'm grateful to her, and that's an interesting, a very interesting paper, and I very much welcome research along those lines, as I know that she does. She's right to make the point that spending on social security is not rocketing. It's not sort of out of control, as one sometimes reads. between 10 and 11% of GDP. If you look just at the working age benefits, that's sort of 4 to 5%, also pretty consistent, not changing rapidly at the moment. She makes an interesting point, as my honourable friend, the member for Poole, did, about the current depth of poverty, and I think that's an important part of the picture that we need to address in our work. I agree with her that the social security system has a very important job to do. You cannot just sort of freeze it for a year and uprate it for another year, because if you do, you inflict harm. And we've seen that harm inflicted and the consequences of it. And she's absolutely right as well that we need a properly functioning health service again. We need support for good employment. And I'm pleased to hear from her, and indeed the point was raised by the honourable member for Torbay as well, that the Work and Pensions Select Committee has been listening to Sir Charlie Mayfield and the excellent Keep Britain Working review that he has published, at the work that he's continuing to develop on that. And the honourable member for Torbay rightly referred to the practice of shuffling people off the books. I think too often what's happened is that people have run into a health problem in the course of their work. They have to take time off, and then kind of by accident, really, those people lose touch with work, they lose touch with the workplace, they become unemployed and inactive. And if there'd just been a bit of flexibility, a bit of continuing communication, then that outcome could have been avoided. And I really welcome the work that Sir Charlie Mayfield is doing, with now over 100 Vanguard employers looking at how best to put these lessons into practice. The honourable member for Torbay also referred to the carers allowance overpayments problem, scandal, over which we appointed Liz Sace, OBE, to, as he said, publish an independent review that looked at how overpayments had occurred, how affected carers could be supported, how to prevent future problems with overpayments arising. The review made 40 recommendations. The government has accepted or partially accepted 38 of them. It's taken action to raise the earnings limit in carers allowance. We've increased it by the largest amount it's ever increased, and we are in future going to uprate the earnings threshold annually in line with the increase in the national living wage, so that accidental exceeding of the earnings threshold will be less common. But the honourable member for Torbay also pointed out the difficulties that there are with the current cliff edge arrangements for the carers allowance earnings threshold, and that's why the Chancellor announced in the 2024 budget that we are looking at the introduction of an earnings taper instead of that cliff edge, and I think it may well be our conclusion that that would do a better job. My honourable friend, the member for Poole, I don't think I ever expected there would be a Labour MP for Poole, but I'm delighted that my honourable friend was successful in being elected to that role, and long may he serve there as well. He's absolutely right to highlight the continuing scale of the challenge of pensioner poverty. I think if you look back over the record of the former Labour government, we saw dramatic reductions both in child poverty and in pensioner poverty. Now, with child poverty, those reductions were reversed under the coalition and the Conservative government. With pensioners, towards the end of the term of the Conservative government, we were seeing the number of pensioners in poverty, that number going up again. But it went up much less dramatically than the number of children growing up below the poverty line. So our priority has been to tackle child poverty, and that's the reason for the strategy that we have published and the changes to universal credit that we debated in the House last week. But I recognise there are continuing challenges for pensioners as well. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I to conclude this uprating debate, the government is increasing the basic state pension, the full rate of the new state pension in line with earnings growth by 4.8%, meeting the government's commitment to the triple lock. We're increasing the pension credit standard minimum guarantee in line with earnings by 4.8% to support pensioners on the lowest incomes. We're increasing benefits to meet additional disability needs and carers' benefits in line with prices by 3.8%. We're increasing a number of working age benefits, statutory payments and disability benefits in line with prices by the same amount by 3.8%. So the GMP increase order requires formally contracted out occupational pension schemes to pay an increase of 3% on GMPs for the reasons that I set out earlier on, in payment earned between April 1988 and April 1997 to give a measure of protection for those pensioners against inflation that is paid for by their scheme. And I commend both of these orders to the House.
The question is the motion on the draft guaranteed minimum pensions increase order as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the motion on the draft social security benefits uprating order. Minister to move formally.
Formally.
The question is the motion on the draft social security benefits uprating order as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I'll now give a few moments for the front benches to swap over.